Coming up on Theater Talk.
It's one of the great things about people who go mad and people who go to the dark side is they have a really good time. If it wasn't fun, they wouldn't do it.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. And Susan, there is a haunting and beautiful new musical off-Broadway at the Vineyard Theater called The Landing, and it has one of the best scores, new scores I've heard in a long time. And why would it not? Because the music is by the great John Kander. Welcome back to Theater Talk.
Thank you very
John.
much.
Writing without his great partner, much missed and beloved Fred Ebb, but you found a very talented young person to collaborate with on this. Greg Pierce, who has done the book and the lyrics to The Landing. Welcome to Theater Talk.
Thank you.
Who is related to, of course, one of the great stage actors working today, our good friend David Hyde Pierce. And your uncle, what's the...
Yeah, my brother is his dad.
Your brother, right.
And David's in The Landing.
Yes.
Of course, sorry, yeah. Right. Hello. Yeah, David's in The Landing. Yeah. And a beautiful, beautiful production directed by our good friend Walter Bobbie. Welcome all to...
Thank you.
Welcome to Theater Talk. So how did you guys get together?
Well, we both went to Oberlin College. That was the connection.
Did you write him a fan letter or something like that?
No. John was active with helping out students who were at Oberlin coming to New York to pursue careers in theater. So there were, I was the writer, there were some actors, musicians, and so after I came to New York, I just shared writing with him. We stayed in touch. I went to workshops of his shows, and 10 years later he asked me to write a show.
Really? What did you see in his work that inspired you to bring him along?
Well, to start with, he's one of the most talented writers I've ever met in my entire life. I've read lots and lots of short stories of his, as well as observing some theater stuff. And it's hard to explain. If for composers, or at least this composer, you read with your ears, which is a hard thing to do, but you hear what you read.
Right.
And
you hear music in the...
You sort of hear the sound of the words. And I read so much of Greg's work, and I heard it. Anyway, I'll try to keep this brief. One day I was sitting in my studio, and I found myself saying, literally, what do I feel like writing? And I remember I even stood up when I thought of it. I said, I'd like to write something really tiny for 4 actors and 4 instruments that you could, so small that you could do it in your living room. And the first person I thought of discussing that with was Greg, because he's a master storyteller, among other things. And basically, it's as simple as that. We started talking, and we started playing What If on this story, which became the first story in our musical. And we began to find working together very easy, a different kind of easiness than with Fred, but we began to develop what I think is our own voice.
You still work around the kitchen table as you used to work around with Fred?
Actually, we work up in the country a lot, and we work on our phones.
That's the new way of doing a musical.
Yes.
Well, we should say for people who have not seen The Landing, it's a collection of short stories, almost in a way, 3 different chamber musicals, if you will, with these fascinating twists on them. David, did you recognize the talent early on as part of the family? Was he writing these short stories that you read when he was growing up?
Yeah, well, I don't know about when you were growing up, but certainly after college I remember seeing sketch comedy that Greg had been part of, and then reading his short stories and novels, and it was clear that he had not only a lot of talent, but a unique voice. And I think that's something that really comes out in this piece. And he has a great ear for language, which translates into a great ear for lyrics, which is wonderful. Doesn't always happen. And also there are some great humor, but also some very sort of unnerving, dark turns that things take occasionally.
Yes, it's disturbing, and things you don't expect happening. This is not a predictable.
No, there's definitely a Rod Serling quality to some of your work. And what was your attraction to this material, Walter?
It was good material.
That'll do it.
Well, you know, the chance to be back in the room with John Kander at this point in this extraordinary career.
Famously did the great revival of Chicago.
And also, I just read Greg's stuff, and I was astonished at the economy, the insight and the economy of his writing. And in fact, the other day we had this situation where there was the end of one scene, which I thought was resolved too quickly, and the beginning of another scene, which didn't quite, and I had all of this, I went on and on about how this might be solved. And then Greg solved it with 5 lines, you know? And so it's amazing how he's able to distill complex psychological situations or narrative situations and achieve a transformation very elegantly, very simply. It's remarkable.
And this is all original material. I mean, is this based on any short stories that you'd written before?
No, we wrote the stories together. We came up with them together. When he asked me to do this, we were just doing a one-act. You know, we wrote the first piece, Andra, and we, as John said, we sat around, played What If, and just the story evolved. And then John took the material to a friend of his who said, why not make an evening of it? And so we came up with the idea of two others, both with narrators. We were interested in narrators who were sort of really inside the story and some who were sort of outside. But we wrote the stories together.
And the Vineyard,
which is kind of your home now.
yeah, it is. I really think of it that way, and so does Greg. They gave us a reading on the first one and helped us with the idea of turning it into a larger piece. And we spent a lot of time down in that basement.
Yeah. Now, David,
No, I don't.
Did you have to audition for your nephew to get the job?
No. Fortunately, I used a family connection.
Got yourself in there.
Yeah.
But were you thinking of him when you wrote these parts?
When we wrote the first one, we were thinking of him.
You were,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think maybe not in the very beginning when we started
The
to
first
play.
piece, no, I don't think.
No, but in the second piece, were you thinking of him?
Yeah, so we did a workshop of the first piece,
Yes.
and he was in that,
Yeah,
and
right.
then we had these great actors and started to write with them in mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we should say that the second piece, which is really quite fascinating, called The Brick, quite disturbing. You're terrific at it. I mean, I know you're a musical comedy.
As
but
the
I never
Brick.
knew you could be this menacing gangster too. I mean,
Oh, no, don't give away.
Well, all right, but it begins as Guys and Dolls, and then it becomes Goodfellas. I mean,
That's funny.
I think that's what you're going for. I mean,
Yeah, well, that's part of the, that was a large attraction for me in the pieces because they're not stylistic, but they're so different.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful, sort of a real a festival for me to get in there with 3 distinctly different pieces.
But they're
to be
all
able to-
connected
But they're all
thematically.
connected, yes.
Yes.
You know, they're all from the same well, but they came up in 3 different buckets, is how I feel. So that, and the other thing was to hear a completely new voice with John. It's not another Kander and Ebb, it's Kander Pierce, and I heard that immediately, and that really caught my ear.
Is is Greg the first person you've really written a whole show with
Yes.
since Fred died? Really? Have you attempted with anything with anyone else? Or?
No, it's every other, all the pieces that we've done since Fred's death were pieces which
You
had
were
been
working on.
started and which I just brought to conclusion. With no, this is the first person he's the first person I even ever asked to work with.
That's very heady stuff for you, isn't
I
it?
know. You're surrounded by legends here. Now I know you've got the family connection already, so you're used to him. But I mean, you must pinch yourself and think, "Geez, I'm working with John Kander." And
I do
Walter
think
Bobbie.
that. I do think that.
I mean, were you intimidated at first when working with him?
I was
Just
not
the thought of it?
intimidated because we had known each other for 10 years
Yes, I see.
and we're good friends. And but I never lost sight of the fact that it's an incredible thing. And the vineyard, the great thing about the vineyard, if you've been there, is that you know, there's an entrance sort of in the ground floor, so you can look up at all the seats. And I walked in during tech rehearsal and looked up, and there was John and Walter and Dave and John Lee Beatty, all our incredible designers, you know, in this basement. And it doesn't get any better.
Was an attraction for you to work with someone as young as Greg is? I mean, were you?
I don't think I ever thought about it. Everybody else has, but I can say we went to school together, only 50 years different.
Yes.
No, it sounds weird, but I never for a second thought of anybody else, or isn't this strange that I should be working with somebody so young? He's just talented.
Also, Greg is old for his years, and Kander isn't.
That's very
No,
very
and you, because you certainly, your music could be written by a young composer that you hear in this score. You're not approaching it the same way as you are other scores. You
know what else I was struck by is that when John and Fred wrote together, they were always adapting someone else's material. So there was at least one other voice in the room, whether it was a book writer or the original source. And the difference with this material is there is no other source. The source of all of these stories is Greg and John. They are not adapting anyone else. So there is immediately a kind of just emotional texture, a lyric, a poetry. I find these pieces incredibly poetic.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, and the poetry is in the music too, because I mean, you know, you famous for the great the fabulous showbiz musicals that you did with Fred. I mean, really defining an era of Broadway. And this is, I mean, I don't want to be cruel to people who aren't here at the table, but let's say that there are certain younger composers who write very prettily, but without any tunes. You write prettily with great tunes throughout the whole thing, you know.
Well, we hit on a sort of language, the two of us, very early on when we were writing the first piece or making up the first piece. And it had to do not so much with writing songs, but with writing music and words happening all at the same time. And sometimes somebody sings a line, and sometimes they don't. There's music going on underneath dialogue. There are sometimes little two-line songs. I don't know how to explain it, but
it's seamless though.
The music never stops.
Yeah,
I mean, there's sections where the music never stops. It's hard to do a recording of this without actually recording the entire
You record the whole thing. But now, when the actors came in, were you still developing the material? I mean, David, as an actor, were you part of shaping the things you were singing and speaking, or was that all there?
Only in the sense that my limitations probably shaped what was right. But I think, you know, we were brought in, the group of us, Julia and Paul and me and now the young boy Frankie, who's in it, who's so great. But we were part of the first reading, not Frankie because he was too young.
Yes.
But and then, as Greg said, they sort of wrote for us in the subsequent pieces. But I can't say that in my recollection that we had any, or needed to have any particular input in how it was shaped, because it was coming out of their brains.
I want to add, as your Tony Award-winning part in Curtains showed us, you have a very wonderful singing voice.
Yeah, he
does indeed.
He's a stealth musical comedy leading man.
He does.
We have to wrap it up soon, but I want to put John on the spot by asking you guys about John. Walter, you've worked with John for a long time. I mean, he really is one of the great composers in the history of musical theater. What continues to impress you, amaze you about his talent?
I think it's what David said. He's still young. I mean, you have a meeting, you say, what about this? And I was thinking, and he just dashes over to the piano. He says, you mean this? You go, oh no, I didn't mean anything quite that good, but thank you. And that's been, and there's been, at this point, there's been a great playfulness, don't you think, in the rehearsal process in terms of tweaking the show and refining the show, and John's willingness to just open up to any idea in the room, and he knows when he doesn't like the idea, and he knows when he's ready to embrace it, and he always makes it better than I expected.
And how does he convey to you guys that if he doesn't like the idea?
He says, no, that's not a good idea. But you know what that allows? It allows us to say, no, that's not a good idea, too.
I got to say, that's true for both of these guys, that they are the sweetest, you know, guys around. and very generous, but they also know they have great ears and they know when it's not right, and whether it's a word that's needs to be changed, or words that's not being said, or something about a phrase or an orchestration, and it's very bracing and wonderful to hear someone say, no, this is how it needs to be, because you realize, oh, it really matters.
So are you working on the next one?
We are. We're developing another one at the Vineyard. So yeah, we've done a couple of workshops and we're well into it. So.
Okay.
Actually, we're starting on a third.
Wow, my gosh.
I figured I'm 86. I'd better hurry up.
You do not look like you're 86, John, I gotta say, really. You look great.
Well, I have to say this, and I don't know how to say it properly. I feel that I am the luckiest man in the world to have this kind of new world to play in, a new sandbox, wonderful people, and who could be luckier than that?
With Fred's probably looking down, right?
He's got a few unpleasant things to say.
All right, the show is called The Landing, a new musical by Greg Pierce and John Kander, directed by Walter Bobbie and starring David Hyde Pierce at the Vineyard Theater. Don't miss it. Terrific, terrific new musical. Thanks a lot for being our guest.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
That's our son. That's our son. And he's here. And he's playing.
Michael, there's a big new revival of Macbeth at Lincoln Center Theater.
Yeah, directed by Tony Award winner Jack O'Brien and starring Ethan Hawke in the title role.
And
but what's the unique take on this? I mean, we've seen a lot of Macbeths lately. What is Jack doing with this production?
He's got wonderful actors in it, including Malcolm Getz, John Glover, and Byron Jennings playing the witches. Suzy Evans from Backstage and I went over and we talked to the actors at Lincoln Center, and we're going to show you some of that right now.
Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble.
How's everything going?
It's awesome. I mean, to try to break these plays down, it's one thing to read them, and, even as a student or whatever, you get this play in high school, and you try to understand it, but to try to make it sing is really difficult and really exciting, and when it does, when you hear it come to life, it's thrilling.
You said
What did I say?
that you had postponed, when you were young, you thought you didn't want to play Macbeth because you thought you might go crazy. Now,
I think any sane actor would be worried about going crazy playing
so
this
is
role.
that prediction, is that trepidation proving true? Are you going a little crazy playing Macbeth?
No, the truth is I'm in an incredibly fortunate situation because I have, to my mind, one of the greatest minds on Shakespeare alive on the planet as my director.
Yes.
And, he really changed a lot of that about that whole outlook for me, because one of the great things about people who go mad and people who go to the dark side is they have a really good time. If it wasn't fun, they wouldn't do it.
This Macbeth is having fun?
I don't mean it quite literally like that. What I mean is, if sin were all dark and painful, all of us would be much better people. Chasing after what you want and satisfying your own desires is something that a lot of us look down on and still do. And so trying to access the part of him, why somebody would do this. They don't do it to torture themselves. They do, megalomania, egomania, narcissism, whatever, all that. It feels good when it's working.
Can you tell me something that will give me some sympathy for Lady Macbeth?
I can. I think what's been a beautiful point of concentration in this production so far, and I think we're certainly going to adhere to that, is that we are really focusing on the fact that these two people really love each other. They love the bones of each other. And so, as a result, every action, every crazy moment and entry into a parallel universe that happens thereafter is born out of love. And so there's a
romantic love.
Yeah, there's a residue of that, which means that you feel more engaged with it, you care more about them as individuals, and I think that's been very interesting. So it's not such a sort of Machiavellian relationship. There's more to it. It's more profound than that.
I think basically it's a nightmare.
I think basically it's a sort of mythic meditation on addiction, on all kinds of addiction. It's, you know, addiction to power, addiction to success, addiction to privilege, addiction to sex, addiction to drugs. I said to Ethan, I want you to think about somebody like Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl and arriving absolutely swollen with adrenaline, at which time you think to yourself, I could do anything. And that's when you take your first drink, your first toke, your first cigarette. You make your first mistake thinking you're invulnerable.
What about her?
Well, she's a willing partner. You know, oddly enough, it's the best marriage in Shakespeare. They're a happy couple. Right at the beginning, he loves her. He brings that treasure home to her. They work together.
But if they're happy, then why isn't that enough?
Because if you make the wrong choices, you have to be responsible for them.
I mean, if you're happy, then why do you need to grab power and kill people to get it?
Because your instinct tells you you deserve it, because you're swollen with your own hubris.
I'm King Duncan.
Oh, and what?
3 scenes, it's perfect. Scene 2, scene 4, and scene 6, and then I'm out.
What do you do?
Dead.
What do you do while you're dead?
I should think go for a walk,
Yeah.
finish off the crossword,
What's the best piece of advice that you have for playing Shakespeare?
do the music. Yes. No pauses. One believes that that's the way his mind worked, Shakespeare, because he wasn't an intellectual, he was an actor. You know, a country boy, bumpkin, basically. So it's all very simple. It's not fancy stuff.
And he was hearing the music.
Yes, oh yes.
Do you believe in this concept that he was like receiving some kind of greater, some kind of higher power of talent?
No. I think what he was doing was he was a country boy with a great genius who needed to write plays. And they needed another play. So they were saying, please, can we have another play? And so he would write it.
Yeah.
And that's why. And then because it's interesting that he quit. And, but I think that figures in that concept, that he'd done it.
And the deadlines were over.
Yes, and there was nothing more to be done. And so he went home to Stratford and ran his newspaper or whatever.
When I was coming over here, I was trying to figure out who was playing what when I saw that you 3 great actors were in this play. You're the witches.
Yes, indeed. We're sisters.
But remember, the witches were played by boys originally, I'm sure, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Shakespeare's
Yeah.
they would have been men. Or men.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, Banquo says the first time he sees the witches, he says, I would call you women, but you have beards. So there's something there.
So how are you? What's your prep for this? How are you working on it?
I can't talk about that. It would be censored.
Are you having?
I think we are certainly still exploring.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the maze right now, trying to figure our way in and out. So it's that time in rehearsal, you know. Things kind of come together and fall apart and come together. It's very exciting.
I play Macbeth.
Macbeth.
Macbeth, yeah.
What's his problem?
He has a lot of problems, and most of them come from good old Macbeth. Yeah. But he gets a chance to even the score at the end of the play. The play to me, thematically, it's about the psychopathy of patriarchy spinning out of control, and so it's great to do something that is a classic and that is also socially relevant. And only in a very with only the thinnest of veils, kind of obscuring the very obvious parallels between the themes of the play and what we're seeing playing out on the world stage right now. So the opportunity to be socially relevant and creatively integrous at the same time, it's so rare in this business, and so I look at it as a great boon.
Is this a concept Jack O'Brien is talking to you about, or is this something that you're working with?
This is something that Jack hasn't spoken directly to that, but in ways he has. This to me, as soon as I realized through my agents that playing Macbeth was, being in Macbeth was going to be a possibility for me, immediately I started thinking, wow, how apropos.
I play Lady Macduff. Everybody knows that she comes to quite a brutal end. I think she really is a counterpoint in the play. Her character kind of represents a bit of normalcy in a kind of crazy world, and obviously she's very unlike Lady Macbeth in so many ways, especially in terms of her priorities and her lifestyle.
Any other specific preparation you're doing for your role?
Just suiting up, showing up, and doing some thinking, and just immersing myself in the world.
I think that's a good tip. Suit up, show up, and do some thinking. Cherry Jones always talked about the 3 Ps. She said be punctual, polite, and polite, and what was the other P? Well, I don't remember. Punctual, polite, I'll have to ask her. Punctual, polite, what would the other one be?
Pretty.
All right. Very good. All right. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Good
you
work.
too. Thanks.
Prepared.
That's it.
You can sign up for viewer updates at theatertalk.org.
Or you can follow us on Twitter. Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Loewe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.